Welcome back to Road to Recovery podcast. I'm Ryan, joined here as always with my lovely, lovely co-host, Tommy, as well as today we're joined by Chloe Jane Prince, who herself is a now eating disorder recovery coach. She just got a new certification last night at midnight, killing it. She does coaching, food, body mindset, all of this important stuff. And so today what we wanted to talk about mainly was this idea in recovery of kind of a halfway point that we all get to, and it's called Quasi Recovery. And it's something that I personally never thought about until I think Tommy mentioned it to me one time, that he was like, you're not really there yet. Your mind is still kind of thinking in all these analytical ways about food and all this stuff. So Chloe, let's hand it over to you. What exactly is Quasi Recovery?
So Quasi Recovery is where, as you said, you probably struggled with an eating disorder for quite a long time, and you start to come out of it, you start to go through recovery. And often people can get stuck in a stage where they are still making decisions based on calories, macros, trying to artificially manipulate their weight, but they aren't counted as having a clinical eating disorder anymore. Mm-hmm. Then their BMI might not be counting as clinical, but they still manifest with the behaviors, and they still probably see themselves as through the eyes of somebody that has an eating disorder, affecting their body image, affecting their life really, because it still limits what they can do so much. But they often think they're not ill enough, or because they're so much better than they were, it can be quite hard for them to take steps forward from that place.
Right. No, and that makes a lot of sense, especially when the clinical view of recovery oftentimes is only the physical point. And so that's something I wanted to ask you too, was what do you think can we do in a clinical setting to help people that are in this quasi state get to the next level and start actually keeping going on the recovery beyond just the physical aspect of it? Because there's so much more.
There is so much more. And I think that one of the problems we have in the system here in the UK, which is the one I know the most about, is that it can be a real barrier for treatment for people. Not only may they see themselves as not being ill enough, but actually they can go to the doctors because they're really struggling with food and body. Really, it's really affecting their life and maybe their health too. And they're told that they're in inverted commas, too heavy to get the eating disorder specialist support, and either they're given a generic CBT or counsellor who can really, really do a lot of benefit. But I also know that as people that have suffered with eating disorders, that you really have to have had it to get it. I really do think that. And whilst people can be really compassionate and really understanding and know all of the knowledge, because it's such a different mindset, and this is the same, I think, with addiction, I think it's really beneficial for them to have a specialist support, because it's so different in the way it manifests. The amount of times I was told to just eat by people in eating disorder services as well as non-eating disorder services, but because it is something that manifests physically and mentally, I think it's really important that they have access to specialist support. And that's why I do the job that I do, because they don't have access to the support that they should have, in my opinion. And so I trained to learn how to help those people that are stuck either in quasi recovery or maybe have struggled with disordered eating and never quite got to the point of clinical, because you don't want them to get there. Like, right. Let's also think about what we can do to stop people going down that rabbit hole. I went to the doctors when I was 12 or 13, and the doctor told me that I was not eligible for help because I was too heavy. And for me, that was like game on. I started before, when I went through my eating disorder journey, I started off as being really overweight. So, I lost half my body weight, and yet I wasn't a low enough BMI, albeit that my mindset and my behaviours around food were, the same as I had when I had anorexia. I just didn't fit in that category in the same way.
Right.
So that's really important. Obviously, what I was going to say there is weight's not the only factor of recovery, because it's dangerous to diagnose people on weight and alone, because we know obviously eating disorders especially have the highest mortality rate of all mental health issues, and people usually at the most what you would consider a healthy weight. Obviously suicide comes involved in it and things like that as well. So you're not only healed just by weight alone. I think it's really important that we put out there that you've got to kind of neurally rewire those behaviours that you've actually had.
It is, and a lot of people that have eating disorders don't have a BMI of under 17.5. You know, I work with people who, you know, are diagnosed with binge eating disorder or bulimia who may not present clinically in the same way. That doesn't mean it's not affecting their quality of life. And for me, the quality of life does come down to mindset. The quality of life, yes, you need to be fueled. Yes, you want to be a healthy weight. Yes, you want your organs and everything to be functioning wonderfully. But, you know, in the same reason that people can struggle with anxiety and get support for anxiety, and struggle with depression and get support for that, it's a mental illness. It's a mental disorder first, and it manifests as having physical symptoms. And that's how I see it. And I hope that, you know, I spoke to a lovely doctor last week because I have conditions following, which I talked to you about, Ryan, before, following my recovery. And it was the first time I've sat with a doctor and he's gone, oh, tell me more about what you do. Tell me more about your experience. And that was really powerful for me because for so long I've gone, doctors, leave me alone. You don't know what I live. I spent years in clinics, like, they were the enemy because they didn't try to get it. And actually having that curiosity, having that understanding to see it as more than a weight and as more than a patient, but as a person, and as a person that wants to have a life.
So actually that makes me think, because I'm kind of in that same situation where it's like I've gotten to the point with certain doctors where, because you and I have suffered different complications from eating disorder stuff, and you meet with these doctors and in a clinical setting, they treat eating disorder patients only from the physical aspect of it, generally speaking. And oftentimes when they look at you or I right now, they would completely dismiss anything going wrong with any of that stuff. So how do you think, and I've asked this before to other people on the podcast, but I'd be curious to your thoughts. What do you think we can do as the people experiencing these things to help in a clinical setting that get them to take it more serious, I suppose, if that makes sense?
I think it's really difficult because part of me wants to reject the system altogether, which is why I don't work within it. I didn't want to work within the confines of the NICE guidelines because I see them as doing a lot of damage to me in my recovery because I gained weight and I was shipped out and that was it. I think the main thing that I want to do in future is, you know, go into GP practices, speak about my experience. And as I did with the doctor last week, he was like, right, tell me more. I was like, great, like, it's my appointment to talk about my health issue, but you know, that was more important to me, and actually raising awareness, not only in terms of clinical work, but in terms of the general population, because the doctors aren't the only one that have this misperception about eating disorders needing people to look emaciated. It doesn't start there, you know, it's a really general, and doctors are people first, right? So if we can appeal to that, then great. I don't know how we can change the system. I honestly don't know. If I could go into, you know, eating disorder seminars and go into GP practice and talk about my experience and what I do now and the benefit that has, really helping people heal, not just getting to a place where they're a healthy weight and then telling them that they're done, you know, really letting people get their lives back and leading them through that, then maybe that is the answer. Maybe showing them what's possible and that it should not end there. And it can't end there because, you know, we're not only talking about the damage of the eating disorder then, we're talking about years of restriction, albeit at a different level, years of eating disorder behaviours, whatever those are, you know, and maybe at a different level, doesn't mean they stop doing damage.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I suppose what I've been wondering about the most when talking about quasi recovery is this idea of how can you help that person recognize, because I myself was in a state where I was sure I was better because I had been like a decent weight, still underweight, but not like, yeah, but like, how can you help them get to a point where they can be okay with continuing that journey on a mental health level and not just looking at it from the numbers and all the stuff that they're already like obsessed in?
Yeah. So the one thing that I do is, I share on Instagram, I speak to anybody who wants to hear about it, about the effects of diet culture and how ingrained in our system it is that it's okay, and in our culture it's okay to count calories, it's okay to go to a restaurant and look at what you want to eat before you get there, and it's normal to skip a meal because you're going to an event. There are so many things that are normalized in our culture that shouldn't be, because it's not normal. And I think that what I choose to do is to spread the message of anti-diet, and I'm not talking anti-health here, I'm talking specifically anti-diet, and showing people that there are other ways. And as I say, I do that on all the platforms that I have, hopefully to have more platforms at some point going forward. But I think it's so important that we challenge it at a level. I speak to my mum all the time, and the amount of time she used the word healthy, or I'm going to eat this because it's healthy, or other things. And don't get me wrong, she does it from a really positive place. But that language is not okay for me. And that language, is diet culture ingrained. So really encouraging people to challenge their language, challenge the words that they use, and challenge the messages that we receive every day from all media and all television programs about what we should look and how we should live our lives.
I think it's really hard as well, because there's a lot of information out there. One person saying vegan's the best way to go, another person saying keto, another person saying carnivore. A lot of people with eating disorders kind of get sucked into these things because they feel there's a certain way to recover. And like we've said, and many professionals have said on here, the best thing that works for you is the thing that's best for your body. And I think that is really important to put out there.
Yeah, 100%. And what's going to work for you is going to be different to everyone else.
Exactly.
And I'm a food freedom coach. I obviously qualified with you, Tommy, as a nutritionist as well. And I always say to my clients, I'm not going to give you a diet plan. I'm not going to give you a diet plan, because it's more important for me that you can learn to recognize your hunger, learn to make your own choices, and not just choose food because I'm telling you that's what you should eat, but actually going, do I want something crunchy? Do I want something sweet? And learning to tap into those things in our bodies, because really, we don't need calorie counters to tell us what to eat. We don't need all of the data and numbers. We don't need a Fitbit to tell us when we're tired and all of that BS. Our bodies are so good at regulating themselves. They don't need any of that. Now, don't get me wrong, people can wear Fitbits if they want to. They can count calories if they want to. But for me, it all comes down to intention. And I believe that for me, as soon as I look at numbers, as soon as I look at calories, whatever number that is, my brain will go and make a decision about whether I should eat, whether I should move. So for me, moving away from the numbers was so important, and learning to connect with my body, especially with the chronic pain and fatigue I have, learning to honor what it's asking is important on so many levels. But I think you're so right, Tommy. Everybody wants the perfect diet. And I remember looking actually myself when I was going to recover, what's the right way to do it? Okay, mini mode. Okay, I'll try that. But then I was terrified. And then, I'll do this way, and I'll try all of these different things because I thought there was a right way to recover. And the answer is there is no right answer. And as you said, it's what works for you.
One thing I wanted to touch upon, me and Ryan were actually talking about it earlier, and Ryan messaged me to actually ask.
Yeah, because I was thinking, getting ready for this interview, and I got me thinking. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, well, what he was asking about was obviously overshooting in recovery, and I told him, like I said, your body will overshoot in some circumstances because it wants to keep on to a certain amount of reserves to keep you alive, because it's got to begin to trust you again that you're going to keep nourishing it. But like I told him, he's not at that stage where he needs to worry about anything like that. But set point weight, I was going to say, this is used quite a lot in recovery. For me, I believe it's quite detrimental, because I feel that getting people to focus on a certain number, this target number, I feel it can hold people back for recovery. I just wanted to ask your opinions on this. Do you use that, or do you think it's detrimental? What's kind of been your experience of that?
Yeah, so obviously I've been in clinics, they gave you ideal weights and things to aim for. I don't know what I weigh now. I encourage my clients not to use weights, and I don't really ask them what they do weigh unless, I think they are in need of some clinical help and I might need to refer on. For me, and as I said, I trust the body, and you have to, I think, lean into that and know that it's going to it's going to set, your body wants to be healthy. It doesn't want to be overweight. It doesn't want to be underweight. It wants everything to function perfectly if we let it. So I completely agree. I think that set point theory is useful. I think also, I know you had Tabitha Farrar on here, who is somebody I really admire, and she talks about something, feast famine theory, or I heard about it from her anyway. And that for me really shows that the body gets to recover, and how many times, and we know for people that are in quasi recovery, they're more likely to relapse. So going in and out of recovery might mean that weight needs to be higher so that they can have the reserves, because the body's going, I don't know when you're going to starve me again, or when we're going to go into a next famine, evolutionary speaking. So then adding that weight and then building the trust, once the body realizes that food is not a finite resource, that then the body is going to be nourished, then the weight can come down. But that depends on how many times you've cycled, how severe those cycles are, and anything else going in your body. And again, every body is unique. So, knowing what that's going to look like for every person, I don't think we can.
The one thing I think is really important, I think Tabitha spoke about it last week. She was talking about recovery. When people says, how do I start to recover? And she just says, you need to start where you are. But she was talking about people early in recovery, say somebody 6 months to a year. She said that in her experience, they're more likely to relapse. And she says for that reason is because you can't see the disadvantages of not having an eating disorder and the things that will take away from you. And like she said, it gets to the point further down the line, say a few years, you just get sick and tired of being sick and tired, and it's you've got to want it.
That's actually what I wanted to mention. Is I've reached the point, and I think hopefully a lot of people will reach this point where you still have certain thoughts and feelings that are, of course, this eating disorder voice that we all share, but you're so tired of dealing with it that it's just the act of thinking about actually acting on it, or going into like for me, thinking about trying to restrict is tiring. So I simply just am not going to do it. So it's too much work. And I think once you get to that point of it being too much work, that's a good mental note to take and realize that's okay. This is a step forward. Now I can really, if I recognize this, really step forward into getting to the finish line and keep on going. What I wanted to ask you is, I don't know if I personally believe in full recovery. I believe in something. Well, my thought is that you have I feel like there's always, because of whatever in your head or in your genetics that makes you more susceptible to having these types of thoughts and stuff like that, you have an ability to have something called maintenance recovery, not quasi recovery, but where you do certain things that keeps your head in a level space. But if you suddenly drop a bunch of stuff, you're gonna slip back. I wanted to know what your thoughts, Chloe, were on that, because I don't have the same qualifications as you both. I have a nutrition qualification, but I haven't gotten any eating.
I know what I would say to that, definitely.
I think experience is more than anything. I can have all the qualifications under the sun, but actually the me too and the power in that is really powerful. So what do I think about that? I believe that true recovery exists, and how I see eating disorders and disordered eating is a way to cope, a coping mechanism. And for me, it's a way to cope with the pain and the trauma and anything that I did not want to feel. At the age of 11, when I experienced the trauma that kicked this all off, but I experienced years of smaller traumas, if I can call them smaller again in inverted commas, because all trauma is trauma. That was the coping mechanism that was available to me at the time. I didn't have access to drugs. I didn't have access to alcohol. I didn't have access to knowing how to process my thoughts. So the way I see it is as a coping mechanism. And that doesn't mean that, I think for me, that doesn't mean that it's a coping mechanism you can't get rid of. I think it's one that I get to replace, and replacing with healthy behaviors. So maybe rather than numbing, restriction for me was a way to avoid feeling. I starved myself so that I didn't have to deal with the trauma. I starved myself so I didn't have to deal with the pain. But actually in that I suffered knowing that the trauma was always bubbling under the surface and needing to essentially get the next fix to continue that numbing and numbing that pain. So now I would say I am fully recovered. Do I experience bad body image days? Yes. Do I worry sometimes about how much I'm eating? Yes. Do I think that's normal in our diet culture world that we live in? Yes. But it doesn't affect my quality of life anymore. I went into lockdown and I had a wobble because I thought, right, the world is out of control. I don't feel in control anymore. I know what I can do to get control. Let's look at my food. And I've been in recovery for years and years and years now. And I never thought I would lose that. And don't get me wrong, I didn't, but that was the first tool that came to me in my toolbox. And that's just how I see it. And when I talk to clients, I say, I'm not going to take the food control away from you. I'm not going to take that out of your toolbox because it's a tool that works. That's why we used it. But let's give ourselves other tools in the same way that everybody else that lives through life has their own coping mechanisms. The food is just one. And don't get me wrong, I will always have a propensity to pick that up first. That will probably be my natural disposition for quite a long time because that's what I did for so long. But now I see, and I've seen that change in my life. I go, right, okay, I feel pulled to do that, but I have this other toolbox. And as the coach, I have a much larger toolbox than most do. And that means I have a lot of choices. And I think that's the difference. I don't see it as something that I'm going to have to experience forever. I see it as something that I get to be mindful of, knowing that it's a tool that I can choose to use.